All right, so we're back live, and I hope everybody can see me and hear me. And so we're ready to hear from the second speaker, Harley Johnson from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and he is going to talk about stability of finite side flakes in bilayer 2D material systems. So Harley, the floor is yours. I'm going to stop participating, and I'll come back to give you a warning at the end of the presentation.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Stefano. Okay, thank you all for being here. It's under the unusual circumstances we're in, it's a very different way to give a presentation. Of course, I can't see any of you, and I don't even know who's there, except that I just spoke to Stefano. Nevertheless, it's a great pleasure to participate in this event. I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference, all the SES officers, as well as the symposium organizers who are working very hard to make sure this goes off without any difficulty, and it's no small feat. So before I get started, I would like to say a few other things. This is a special occasion. It's a awardees symposium. I'm deeply honored to be here and to be recognized this year as a fellow of SES, and I'd like to congratulate also the other 3 fellows and the other award winners who are being recognized here, including Pradeep, my friend from Brown, who just spoke. So it is really an honor for me to participate in this. SES is an organization that has been important to me since the beginning of my career. In 1994, I attended the SES conference at Texas A&M when I was a student, and I presented work for my undergraduate research in that conference. And of course, I presented it on transparencies and with an overhead projector. And so things have changed quite a lot. In 2008, I had the pleasure of being the general chair of the SES conference when we hosted it here at Illinois in Urbana. And then since then, I've served on the board of directors of SES and been involved almost every year. So it's a great opportunity to be here, and to be honored as a fellow is really a special honor for me. So I'm going to talk today about some recent work in my group. I'm going to talk, sort of try to tell a little bit of a story about these 2D material systems that we've been studying. The work that I'll focus on in the presentation has been done in collaboration with mostly with a recent postdoc, Shuzhe Zhu, who's now a professor at Zhejiang University. Also a PhD student, Emil Anneblink, who's nearing completion of his PhD, working with me and with Elif Ertekin in mechanical engineering at Illinois. And I'll highlight a little bit later some of the work that Emil has done and is actually presenting in one of the recorded video sessions that you're able to see if you go to the main conference website. I'd encourage you to go see that presentation. So the work has been done mostly in the Department of Mechanical Science and Engineering, where I have been for many years at Illinois. I'm also a member of the Material Science Department. The other collaborator outside of Illinois is my longtime colleague and collaborator, Pascal Pochet, from CEA in Grenoble, France. And I should say that this entire area that I'm working in now in 2D materials mechanics really grew out of a collaboration with Pascal in a sabbatical that I did about 5 years ago. So on to the technical part of the presentation. So what's shown in the title slide here is just an image from a calculation that Shuzhe did on bilayer MOS2 systems. And the MOS2 structure is illustrated in this sketch. So what's shown is, we call it a bilayer, and we refer to MOS2 as a 2D material. But in fact, MOS2 has a complex structure that really consists in each layer of MOS2. You really have 3 rows of, or 3 layers of atoms. You have 2 sulfur layers and a molybdenum layer. And so the top MOS2 structure is a triangle shape. That's what we refer to as a finite size flake. And the bottom is a larger substrate, if you like. But this essentially is what we are calling a bilayer of MOS2. Looking at the MOS2 structure, we see 3 different stacking possibilities referred to as AA, 3R, or 2H. AA is arranged such that all the sulfur atoms are positioned above one another in the bilayer. 2H is similar in the sense that you have alignment of the top layer and the bottom layer, and atom columns running all the way through. But in this case, the sulfur and the molybdenum atoms are stacked above one another. And 3R is a variant in which the top layer and the bottom layer are offset in a particular way. So this is the structure we're studying, and we're interested in these what we're calling finite size flakes, which are really quite small, just nanometers in size. So to say a little bit more about the area of 2D materials and what motivates us to work here. So we're in particular thinking about 2D material heterostructures or homo epitaxial structures, in which one can imagine, for example, a layer of carbon, which is sort of the canonical 2D material, being stacked on layers of other 2D materials that could include hexagonal boron nitride, or in the case that I showed in the previous slide, MOS2, molybdenum disulfide. Tungsten diselenide is another common 2D material that we have interest in. We can envision stacking these and obtaining new emergent properties that we wouldn't have otherwise. And the image on the right is, in this area, sometimes we refer to this as the obligatory figure, because you see the same figure repeated in almost every presentation given in this area over the last few years. But it nicely illustrates this idea: graphene and HBN, MOS2 being stacked one upon another, and so on. Now, in terms of the emergent properties that one might hope to discover, probably the most well-known such property was observed a few years ago in bilayer graphene. And in this system, one looks at a stacked 2-layer graphene structure that has a small twist angle between the 2 layers. So we call this twisted bilayer graphene. And there's observation of special properties that occur when the twist angle is precisely, in this case, 1.05 degrees. So that's a very small rotation of the top layer relative to the bottom layer, at which one can observe superconductivity. And so what's shown in the image is the arrangement of G1 and G2 layers on top of one another. And at 2 different twist angles that are very close together, one is 1.16, the other is 1.05, one finds that in the case of the 1.05 degree twist angle, as temperature is reduced, as we go lower and lower in temperature, while still at a finite temperature, the resistance goes to 0. So this is the observation of superconductivity. And you can see that this feature is very, very sensitive to twist angle. Now, one would like to be able to understand why that is, and the work on the mechanics and the electronic structure of this phenomenon these are ongoing. But in the electronic structure, we do know that there's a particular band alignment that happens at 1.05. This is where we observe so-called flat bands. So this is a little bit of motivation. There are other interesting properties that occur in these twisted bilayer structures, and this area is referred to as twistronics. Now, the case of MOS2, homo structures or stacked bilayers, is interesting, and it's not unique though. There are other systems that have similar behavior, but in particular, I want to focus on the observation that in these stacked structures, one observes in some cases spontaneous rotation of the flakes. And when I say spontaneous rotation, I mean when a stacked structure is made with a particular alignment, it is sometimes, in fact, often observed that a small flake will spontaneously or autonomously, if you like, rotate to off perfect stacking. This has been seen for quite a long time, and you know, at first glance, it's surprising perhaps that the stacking would do this rather than stacking according to one of the AA or other regular stacking configurations that I showed on the first slide. The two images here are interesting to me because the image on the left was observed in high-res TEM all the way back in 1998. And so in terms of 2D material research, this is prehistoric, literally prehistoric in terms of what we know about graphene. On the right is a more recent observation of MOS2 on hexagonal boron nitride. And what's nice about this result is that it shows a statistical distribution of angles at which the top layer might situate relative to the bottom layer. And you can see that there's small angles are preferred, but many angles are possible. The other thing I wanted to show on this slide is more easily seen on the left-hand side, which is that when the bilayers rotate, they form moire patterns. And we know moire patterns sort of in our everyday life. Anytime we see two layers that have periodic structure offset from one another or strained or twisted relative to one another, we see these interference patterns, these superlattice patterns. And that's what's observed in this 1998 high-res TEM study of bilayer MOS2. So the question that we're trying to address in this work is, what is the relationship between the small rotation angle and the moire pattern? And obviously we know that there's a relationship between the two, or else we wouldn't be asking the question. But how can we quantify that, and how can we make this predictive? So we can observe this using atomistic modeling in molecular dynamics or lattice statics through energy minimization methods, and that's what we're doing here. Again, the top figure shows you the same image I showed on the opening slide. So this is an MOS2 flake on a larger MOS2 substrate. In this case, it's about 10 nanometers. We can look at much larger systems, of course, but the features of this observation tend to be magnified at the smaller sizes. So we start there. We also know that when these are grown using chemical vapor deposition, the flakes tend to start with very tiny nuclei, and then they grow. And so the small size flakes are very relevant for understanding synthesis. So what we've done here is to go into labs and to use empirical potentials. We've used REACT-FF type potentials to model MOS2, and we've used a simpler interlayer potential to model the van der Waals interaction between the upper and lower layers. And we've done the following. We started, so for example, started from AA stacking, which is shown above. If we initially rotate the triangle by 1 degree and then minimize its energy, we find that it rotates further in the same direction and it goes to 2.8 degrees. On the other hand, if we start with an AA stacking and we initially start at 6 degrees and then allow it to relax, it hardly rotates at all, just a tiny amount. If we look at the 3R stacking, for example, and we start with a 2 degree rotation and we allow it to relax, it rotates back to 0 degrees orientation. Whereas if we start at 3.5 degrees and then we allow it to relax, it barely moves at all. Again, we can repeat the experiment for 2H stacking, which is structurally a lot more like AA stacking. Start at 2 degrees, and it does what 3R stacking does. It goes to the 0 degree rotation. We start at 3.5, it barely moves. So we can observe this phenomenon of spontaneous rotation of the flakes, and we know that there's some, or we suspect that there is some relationship to the moire pattern, because when we do the calculation, we can also see this moire showing up in the stacking of the atoms. So indeed, the angle dependence of the energy is due to a moire effect. And so that's what this slide shows. Here, we're looking at graphene. And as I said, we see many of the same things for graphene bilayers as we do for MOS2 bilayers, and indeed for any 2D material stacked on any crystalline substrate, including a bulk crystal. And I actually spoke about that in the talk yesterday. So what we see here is, for the case of graphene, two alternate stacking starting points: AA stacking, which is actually higher energy stacking to start with, and AB stacking, which is a lower energy stacking to start with. And when I say to start with, I mean from zero angle rotation. So if you start with the graphene triangle on the graphene substrate with zero angle rotation, in the case of AA stacking, it has high energy. And we can map the energy surface through the angle degree of freedom. We find that there is a local minimum at about 3.1 degrees. And at the 3.1 degree rotation, this is what the moire pattern looks like. If we go a little bit further to 4.4 degrees, we see a different moire pattern, and we see a local maximum in energy. And we can continue and see another local minimum, and we can proceed along and see higher and higher orders of minima and maxima at discrete angles as we go. AB stacking looks similar, except the 0 degree case is the minimum energy, global minimum energy. The first maximum occurs when the moire pattern looks like this. Second minimum occurs when the moire pattern looks like this at 3.6 degrees. And so we find that the total energy depends on the fit of the moire structure to the triangle. It also depends on the flake size. And so as we imagine growing the flake larger and larger, we see that this energy surface changes, but there's still the features of local minima and local maxima. And again, it's present here in graphene, it's present in MOS2, and so on. What we have concluded through a series of attempts to model this in different ways, both numerically and analytically, and I'll say a little bit more about the models as we go. What we've concluded is that the moire effect necessarily should be understood as a dislocation effect. And so here's what we mean by that. If one looks at the flake and the stacking of the flake on its substrate, the moire patterns contain spots that are connected by lines, if you like, that separate regions of equivalent stacking. So within this top left corner figure, the reddish lines are separating regions of stacking that are equivalent. So AB stacking separated from BA stacking, separated from AB stacking, and so on. Along the lines, we have features that are dislocations in the plane. So these dislocations are, in fact, partial dislocations. We call them van der Waals dislocations as a sort of a nickname, because what's happening is it's the formation of a dislocation in the van der Waals interface between the layers. And if one looks a little bit more closely at the stacking, as shown through D, E, F, and G, one sees that the region surrounding, that's shaded in pink, the region surrounding that the center of that partial dislocation line is effectively a dislocation core. And when the energy of the system is minimized with respect to positions of all the atoms, that core takes a little bit narrower form, and it resembles more closely what we're used to seeing when we think about either a edge type or screw type partial dislocation in a bulk crystal. But here it's localized a little bit more, and the reason it's localized is because the van der Waals energy surface is a little bit softer, if you like, and so it can be localized. But what we understand now is that the triangular shape contains an array of dislocations. That's really what the moire pattern is telling us. This is an array of dislocations. So now, in thinking about the energetics, we can understand that the energetics can be described as a dislocation energetics problem. We also pointed out that this effect depends upon the flake size. And on this slide, I'm showing a couple of things. On the upper left-hand corner, we're mapping the total dislocation line area as a function of angle. And just like we saw with the energy, if we look at the total area of dislocation, we see these local maxima and local minima occurring at discrete angles. We can also associate that with the displacement, the mean displacement of all the atoms in the crystal. And what's shown here in these blue and red triangles represents displacement fields of atoms at different rotation amounts corresponding to different local minima and local maxima. So the dislocation, whether we think of this as a dislocation line problem or as the strain associated with the displacements of atoms in this rotating triangle, you see the same features that we see in the total energy, which I showed in the previous slide. Now, as I said, the angles, the local maxima and minimum angles depend on the flake size. Smaller flakes have larger angles for their local minima and their local maxima. And indeed, it's possible to predict these multiple angle orders, first, second, third, and fourth, and so on, analytically. And without going into the details of the model, the point is that we can see that the stacking or the positioning of the moire spots, therefore the arrangement of the dislocation network, is quite different in the case of a local minimum than in the case of a local maximum. And so if we treat n as the order of the first, second, third, fourth minimum, and so on, and r prime as a normalized size of the flake, we can predict the angle for a certain flake size. And so, for example, if we start from AA stacking, we can predict precisely what it takes to get a 1.1 degree twist angle in terms of the size of the flake. Or if we start from AB stacking, we can say if we want 1.1 degree twist angle, and remember that's close to the magic angle in graphene, we know exactly what size flakes will give us those angles. So this is the other thing to point out is that we have really precise matching between the atomistics and the analytical model. And so this is a credit to Xu Zheju, the postdoc who worked on this, and I think it's quite an interesting result. So before I close, I want to just say a little bit more about how to think about moire patterns as dislocation arrays. And I see that the session chair has appeared, so I think that means I probably will need to wrap up in a few minutes.
Yeah, a warning, couple of minutes warning.
Got it. Okay, thank you. So just a little bit more about this. Dislocation arrays is the way that we understand the moire patterns. We've introduced this idea of a van der Waals dislocation. This was also referred to as an interlayer dislocation in work from David Srolovitz and his team. This interface misfit dislocation is just like a bulk dislocation in many ways. It can be modeled using a Peierls model and using all of the same terminology, but the energetics are different because you don't have the surrounding bulk material to sort of take up the strain energy. And for much more on this and a very nice clear presentation, I'll encourage you to go see Emil's presentation on the main page. And the most recent results are also published in arXiv. And there's a series of other papers on this, including a 2017 paper where we introduced this idea. So I'll summarize and just make a few acknowledgements. The 2D material flakes that we're studying do undergo these spontaneous rotations in order to minimize their energy when they're on a crystalline substrate or on another crystalline 2D layer. Clearly, the energy surface is associated with the moire pattern, and the moire pattern is simply an array of dislocations, and that's really what has captivated our interest in this problem for some time. The rotation angle is a function of flake size and shape, and it can be predicted and may be used, we believe, for twistronic device design. So this is a list of folks on the team. I wanted to highlight, just those people who are more closely involved in this part of the work. But I would like to thank them, and I would again like to thank SES for including me in this and for the being honored as a fellow. So I'll stop there. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Well, thank you very much, Harley, for the very nice talk, and congratulations again on your induction as an SES fellow. And let's see if there are any questions. I'm refreshing the page to see if anything percolates from the backstage.
I see one question that I just got by email somehow. I don't know how that happened, but
okay. So you wanna? Is it by any chance by Susan Pagosh?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I can read it. So
Yeah.
To keep it formal, I guess. So it's a great talk. What is the boundary condition on the triangular flake?
Okay, good question. Yes, the flake is traction-free. We're minimizing its energy by allowing it to rotate, but we're not allowing it to relax in other ways. We know there's a little bit of in-plane relaxation that occurs, but we neglect that for most of the calculations that I've shown you here. But we're not applying or displacements, so it's simply traction-free.
Okay, let me refresh and see if we got anything else.
And I saw another one, I think.
Yes. So it says, this is by Ananya Renuka Balakrishna. Thanks for the nice talk. I'm wondering whether you observe spontaneous rotation when you displace the flake in both clockwise and anti-clockwise directions.
Okay, excellent question. Actually, that's a very good question, and I have to admit that we've not thought very much about that. But I can tell you what I expect to happen. Especially in the case of graphene, there's no broken symmetry with respect to clockwise or anti-clockwise. So you expect to see a symmetric behavior. In MOS2, depending on the substrate, you might see a small effect, but because there is a kind of a parity symmetry that would have to be broken. But I don't think it would actually affect the mechanics very much. It would affect the electronic structure, but not so much the mechanics. So that's a great question. Thank you.
All right, so let me refresh one more time to see if there's any last second one. Let's see. Okay, no, I don't see any new questions, so I guess this is a good timing to kind of move forward. So thank you, Harley, again for your talk.
All right, thank you.